This is Pivot Perspectives with Chris O'Byrne, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant people on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on their road to success, and get exclusive access on how to implement their success into your life and business. Pivot Perspectives is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board and your host, Chris O'Byrne.
Troy Helming, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Excited to be here.
Now, you have accomplished a lot, both business-wise and otherwise, and so I want to dig into the companies that you formed and some of the lessons that you've learned. But what I'd like to start with is, before you even went into business, what was a defining moment in your life that kind of shaped who you became and the path that you took?
Wow, great question. So I would say there might be two, but the first one that comes to mind is when I was a kid. My dad was a successful entrepreneur and he was building his dream house. And this was in 1979. I was quite young. And anyway, he put solar on the house. And it was a very large 7,500 square foot home. And we had a big solar shed. It heated our pool, our hot tub, our water, and then in the wintertime, it heated the air in the house. And one of my chores as a kid growing up was to maintain the solar hot water heating system. So my dad's diehard Republican, still is, but he did that because it was a way to save money and be more energy independent. And that shaped kind of who I am. And also he and my mom were always complaining about, the oil shocks from the 80s and all that, and dependence on foreign energy and those kind of things.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I can see how that shifted, your thinking overall. What was the other moment you were thinking of?
Yeah, that was really where I saw that being an entrepreneur had its ups and downs, but my dad being able to build his dream house was exciting for me. We grew up in a very modest, middle-class neighborhood home, and then he built this huge place out on a ranch because his company that he had started had some big wins. Whereas a lot of the parents of my friends in, high school and college and so forth, they, some of them did pretty well, but a lot of them, were kind of average or whatever. But I was like, gosh, if you have your own business, it gives you the opportunity to really, have some exciting, whether it's a payday or something you want to do or pursue your dreams. That was really inspirational for me.
So did you jump into starting your own business, being an entrepreneur, like from the beginning, or did you go through, a little corporate phase and what people often do?
Yeah, so my dad recommended I go to work for somebody else to learn not only what I'm good at, but almost even more importantly, what I'm not good at and what I didn't like. So I did. After college, I got a business degree, and my dad I started in engineering, and he was like, hey, get a business degree. You can hire engineers. So I did, and I did. But I love engineering. I still think like an engineer. But I worked for AT&T out of college and did well there, worked for them for a couple of years, broke some records, and their reward to me of being one of the top, sales people in that region was to shrink my territory in half. So I was like, good job. Now do the same thing in half the territory, half the potential customers. So they did that 2 times in a row, and I hit Achievers Club both years. But I finally was like, nope, I'm out of here. So I started my own business to compete directly with them.
That'll teach them. So,
yeah.
So now you ended up starting 2 clean energy companies. What was the first one? And what was that process like of getting that off the ground?
Okay, so it was in the mid-1990s. I started a company called Trade Wind Energy. It was originally Kansas Wind Power. And getting it off the ground was not easy. I sold my telecommunications company that I had started, the one we just talked about, and did that for a few years. Sold that, had some money in the bank, but didn't have enough. Should have saved more. I was young. But I made a bunch of mistakes, not only, spending money on things that didn't really need to spend money on, like marketing brochures and things like that. So there were some silly mistakes, but it was tough because I didn't know the business. And so after getting a number of like ranchers and farmers to sign leases for wind farms, I was successful with that. But then trying to get utilities to sign a contract to buy the power, they're like, who are you? You don't have any experience in the power business, right? So eventually brought in a partner and formed a partnership with a California-based wind farm developer and learned from them and closed some deals with them and kind of was able to wean ourselves off of them after a few years.
Oh, okay. That's a good way to use a partner in this case and establish your name. So were you producing the energy, building the wind farms, the whole gamut?
So our business model was to be a developer. So what that means is you do all of the pre-construction development, and sometimes you do the construction too, or you help manage it. But those are things like getting the land leases for, in this case, wind farms, and then I switched to a solar farm company later. But so site control, the land is number one, then getting interconnection agreements, meaning you have to sign an agreement and go through a bunch of studies to connect the wind farm site to the grid. So that's about a 18-month to 2-year process back then. Now it's a 5 to 7 year process because there's so many projects trying to connect, and most of them get canceled or abandoned because there's not enough transmission capacity, or the cost to interconnect to the antiquated grid are so high because everything's got to be upgraded. But anyway, so site control, interconnection, getting a customer, like a power purchase agreement, and then arranging the financing for the project. Those are kind of the four main legs to the stool,
Okay.
if you will.
What were some of the biggest lessons you learned from starting and running Tradewind?
Yeah, well, so one of them was don't try to, not compete with your utility, but I was asked to be the expert witness by the Sierra Club in litigation where they were trying to slow or stop some coal plants. And so I said, sure, because they should be doing wind instead and, stand up for what I believe in. But turns out that same utility was a utility that we wanted to sell power to from one of our wind farms. So, that wasn't the smartest thing in the world to do. So I had to be more careful about, the kind of activism, I guess, is one thing. And another thing was just the capital, the capital needed to do the development, like doing those interconnection grid studies that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
They cost several $100,000 and they take years to do. And so raising the capital to do that and all of the other things wasn't easy. And I thought I thought everything would happen faster. And this is probably true for all businesses. It takes longer than you think and it costs more than you think.
What what was your plan, or how did you go about getting that funding, that capital?
Well, yeah, so we were, I think, a little bit clever, and I can't take all the credit for it. We had a great team, and my wife, who was my co-founder, was CFO, and a lot of others on the team. But one of the things that we were, I think, pretty good at was getting our story out there in the news, in the press. And so as we were talking about it, it was kind of a new concept, developing wind farms in Kansas, and other states around there in the Midwest. And so people would reach out to us because they'd find our website and they'd, fill out the form or whatever and say, hey, I'm interested in learning more about what you're doing. Anyway, we found a number of angel investors that way. And we raised about $5 million from angel investors to fund the stuff that I was just talking about.
Did you learn any, I guess, were there any big mistakes you learned from in that with working with angel investors?
Definitely. Like, we did not spend the money we should have spent to have the law firms do the right securities work that we needed to do. So even though we thought we had it done in like, for instance, the state of Missouri, the law firm that we had hired, we spent the minimum amount possible, and then we were slow to pay them, and they weren't doing all the right, all the things that they really needed to do that we should have, been more on top of that. It just wasn't a priority for me. So I feel stupid talking about it now, how dumb that was. But we got a regulatory challenge in the state of Missouri that we had to deal with as a result of that. So that was the biggest issue. Today it's easier because of the Jobs Act, crowdfunding and all of that is out there. But back then, the regulatory requirements were much more strict. And if you didn't follow them exactly, and then you have, and I don't know if I want to say enemy, but somebody, there were some competitors and some conventional oil and gas and coal utility folks that were trying to slow and stop us. They used our lack of being perfect, having all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, to complain to state regulators. That caused scrutiny that we weren't ready for.
Oh, that is a big lesson. I think people can get a lot out of that one, because this kind of behavior applies almost across the board when you're in business. You can't negate your competitors and what they might do. So, did you transition, sell, exit, trade, win before you started Pristine Sun?
I did. I sold most of my shares in 2004, and so EarthGrid, my current company, is company number 8. I've had 1 failure and 6 exits. Of the exits, 4 were meaningful. 2 of those companies became unicorns, including TradeWind. TradeWind became the largest wind developer in the United States in 2017. They were number 2 in 2018. They're now a $35 billion division of Enel Green Power. So it's like giving a child up for adoption and seeing it do well, I guess, when you sell a company. So I sold most of my shares in 2004. Started Crystal Energy or Crystal Planet. There were 2 divisions, and that was my failure. We were selling like energy efficiency and small residential and small business renewable products. The margins were so thin. We were ahead of our time. That was one we had to close down. But almost immediately after that is when I started Pristine Sun. That was in, 2008, 2009. And moved back out to California because I was in Kansas for the wind company, and that company's doing really well. It's developing about 12 gigawatts, which is roughly $12 billion worth of solar farms right now.
So when you started the second company and then that failed, was there a lot of discouragement, and were you hesitant after that? Or was it like, okay.
For sure. Yeah. I was like, the grass is always greener on the other side. I was like, maybe I should just go get a job, and so I actually did some consulting for a little while, paid the bills. I also did a little stint with a biodiesel plant where I designed and built a biodiesel plant because I was making biodiesel in my garage for my diesel Jeep Grand Cherokee. I was like, oh, well,
Nice.
Had some extra. And anyway, it turned into a 10 million gallon per year biodiesel plant. Which I sold and made some money with, which really helped me start the solar company. So I was tinkering around with the biodiesel, but doing consulting work to pay the bills and, start a family. We had our first child at that time. And anyway, and then it's in my blood. And so when I had the opportunity to expand the biodiesel, I did that, was able to exit that. And then I saw the margins were getting pretty interesting for solar. Because I grew up in a solar house, right? So I always loved solar, but it was, so expensive. But I saw that the cost had come down enough that there could be a real opportunity, particularly in California, where they had passed some legislation to really provide some strong incentives.
Okay, interesting. So, trying to think of what my question in there was. It led me to another question, but I love the biodiesel thing. Oh, now I remember. But I'm a former chemical engineer, so the biodiesel part, especially, always thought that'd be so fun to do, to create your own. For somebody who is interested or thinking about getting into renewable energy as a business, what recommendations would you have for them?
Make sure you have the stomach for it. In the solar business, we call it the solar coaster because it's ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. So that's important. Just being an entrepreneur at all, you have to have the stomach for it because, again, it always takes longer than you think and it costs more than you think. So the first person to stop getting a paycheck is the founder, right? So you want to make sure you have that's my second bit of advice, is have a nest egg set aside, where you can pay your bills for at least 6 to 12 months and not take any salary at all from the company. Ideally, you raise enough money from your company where you can take a salary, but you don't want to make a dumb short-term business decision based on a short-term financial, pain point that you have in your personal life. I've made that mistake too. So that would be another one. And then the third thing is, I kind of already touched on it, but know what you're good at and what you're not good at so that you can surround yourself with people who complement you.
Yep, I'd say that's pretty sound. So then what pushed you to write a book?
So that was actually during Crystal Planet. Yeah. I wrote almost 20 years ago, The Clean Power Revolution. Please don't buy it. It'll put you right to sleep.
There's a glowing endorsement.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, I think one person bought it last month, maybe. They suffered from insomnia, so they made the purchase.
It was recommended by their doctor.
That's right. Anyway, so I had learned so much and gotten death threats when I was developing wind farms, and my picture was up on a dartboard, and it was tough developing clean energy in coal and gas country in the Midwest. But I learned so much, not only from all the mistakes that we made, but also from the partner we brought in, the California wind farm developer and other things along the way. And so I was like, I really want to see clean energy expand because it's so much cheaper. Wind and solar, even back then, were so much cheaper than nuclear, and about the same price as coal, but more expensive than natural gas. Today, of course, they're cheaper than everything by far. But I really wanted to see it expand because I knew that if we could expand solar and wind, it would continue to drive down the cost, because they're really technologies, just like any other technology, whether it's flat screen TVs or cell phones. As the volume of production goes up, the cost can go down and the cost stays the same and the features go up, one or the other. Whereas extraction businesses like coal, gas, and oil, they don't have that same adoption curve advantage. So I wanted to support the industry. Anyway, so I wrote a book and gave away a lot of my, knowledge on how to develop solar and wind projects. So I felt that was important. And I also thought it would help us find more customers selfishly for Crystal Planet, the company that we had at the time.
Yeah, always good to have several goals for what the book's going to accomplish for you. What's your next book going to be about?
Haven't even thought of one, frankly. I'm so busy with EarthGrid that, I thought, maybe I should write a book called Caveman Country, talk about the power of people who dig stuff up from the ground and burn it, oil, gas, coal, and how they've influenced politics and so many things over many, many decades versus, anyway. But no, I'm more interested in just going out and building projects that actually make a difference in lowering our wholesale energy prices and reducing air and water pollution.
So tell me about EarthGrid.
All right. So EarthGrid is a company that is using plasma to bore through underground. So here's a kind of a little picture of a little tank with plasma torches. But I formed the company in 2016, so almost 8 years ago, because I was in a bar we were drowning our tears over beers at my solar company because we had to downsize one of our solar farms by 75% because the grid couldn't handle it. So we were upset, and this happens all the time in the solar and wind industry. 4 out of 5 solar and wind projects get canceled or abandoned because I think I may have mentioned lack of transmission. Yeah. Anyway, so Dominic, this guy on our team, was bragging to his girlfriend about when he was on his SEAL team. He's a former Navy SEAL. He was bragging about how his SEAL team used to practice entering enemy ships underwater by cutting through the side of a ship with a plasma cutting torch. Take over the ship, plate falls in, water rushes in, pow, pow, pow. We're like, dude, you're a badass. Anyway, middle of the night, I pop out of bed. I was like, he said 20,000 degrees could take your arm off. 20,000 degrees, is that hot enough to bore through rock? Online, yeah, that's hot enough. Okay, surely somebody's doing this. Researching, no, nobody's doing this, but I found some stuff from the 1970s, Los Alamos National Lab, experimented with it on boring. Anyway, couldn't stop thinking about it, up all night. And for weeks, and in fact months, I was like researching and trying to learn, maybe this could solve the problem, because if we could put power lines underground, then people wouldn't be able to stop it. You don't have to go through public comment periods, because it takes 20 years to build a new transmission line in this country, at least 10, but on average 18 to 20 years. And we need them a lot faster, right? That's what I talk about in my book. Anyway, so finally hired an engineering firm to do a feasibility study. They said, yes, it'll work. 2, you can bore at speeds of 1 kilometer per day. Number 3, here's what your operating costs are. And number 4, nobody else is doing this, right? So I'm like, okay, we got a business here. So a little side project in 2017, I built, tinkering with a couple of mechanical engineering buddies. We built our first prototype, punched a hole through a boulder of granite in minutes. And I was like, yeah, it worked. Anyway, so fast forward to today, EarthGrid has been making money with our first tunnel boring robot machine, and we're building a second larger one now. And we've signed contracts to deliver solar and wind power to the grid, to substations that have capacity in months rather than years or decades, and power, water, and fiber for data centers that are springing up that can't get the power to run the data center from their local utility fast enough. And so we're like, hey, I know a solar farm or a wind farm over here. We can be your underground extension cord and build a tunnel between the two.
So simple, but brilliant. Oh, see, yeah. Readers are going to want to know, how does he come up with these ideas? Do you have any sort of process in your creative thinking, or it's just the way you're built?
Well, it's all about taking magic mushrooms. No, just kidding. No, I mean, it's really just a problem that I felt the pain for years. Again, solar and wind farms, if we didn't have to abandon it completely, we would have to downsize it, like the story I told, right? And so it was a pain point, and building hundreds of solar and wind projects with substations and going under creeks and under rivers, the underground construction was always a problem. So in this case, it was just an idea that was inspired by the Navy SEAL guy that worked for us. And I was like, that maybe could solve this problem. And I just kept thinking on it, and it kept, germinating in my mind, and until I came up with it. And I was like, okay, well, that's a problem. How are we going to solve that? And you just work the problem, And so I was still running the solar company, but each time I came up with a challenge, I figured out another solution for it. And I'll give you one example. How do we get the rights of way? How do we get the permission to put our tunnels underground? And so I was like, I wonder if we were a utility, maybe even a telecommunications utility, which is easier to become a telco than an electric utility in most states. If we're a utility, could we get like preferred access to put our tunnels under the road? And sure enough, we could. And I brought on a former California Public Utility Commissioner, Rochelle Chong, and she and I brainstormed on this years ago. And so EarthGrid is now approved as a utility in 45 states.
Oh. So what's another lesson you learned just from doing this, from EarthGrid?
Let's see. Well, actually, the first thing that comes to mind is a lesson from Pristine Sun real quick. When we started exploding, getting a lot of contracts, we grew too fast. We grew from like 14 people to 80 in about a year. And we should not have done that, because there were some bad hires. And you hear the expression, a bad apple spoils the bunch. That definitely happened. We had to, terminate some people, and some other people that were anyway, it was a real problem. So that lesson that I'm implementing now, we use a service called Culture Index. And we have everyone take the test on Culture Index. And it's not just a personality test. It also helps to determine the work style of a potential candidate, so that we know whether they will fit in the right seat on the bus for the right team that we're trying to hire for.
Okay. Excellent. So, changing gears completely, I would love to hear the story of American Ninja Warrior, how you even thought of doing that in the first place, and then how great the whole thing has turned out.
Oh, that's funny. So I was a gymnast in college, and I've been a rock climber off and on since the early 1990s, and yoga since 1991. But let's see, I was, what was I, 48 or 49 years old, and my son at swim practice saw the NBC show American Ninja Warrior on TV, and he was watching when I came to pick him up, and I watched with him a little bit. I was like, that's cool. And then we got hooked, and we binge watched old seasons. And anyway, and I heard one of the announcers, Matt Eisman, say, "Oh, so and so at a ninja gym." I'm like, "Wait a minute, there's a thing called a ninja gym?" So I
Yeah.
looked it up, and I looked it up and went to one in Concord, California, not far from me. I was like, "Oh yeah, I could do this. That looks easy. I'm going to be great at this." Promptly threw out my back and hurt my shoulder the first time I went, but I'm so competitive, and so I kept going. I healed up and then kept going back, and got pretty good, and then started competing in local ninja competitions and then regional competitions that have nothing to do with the show. It's a whole sport, right? They have their own leagues and things like that. And got to where I was in the top 0.5% of all ninjas in the professional or the elite division, even though I was older. And because I just kept putting in the work and training. And my dad I had a bit of a belly and all that when I first started, but I just put time into it for about 2 years and got to where I got pretty good. And then I was invited to be on the show 4 times.
Wow. So, for people who don't know, what exactly do you do in a ninja competition?
So it's obstacle course racing. And I think it's a great metaphor for being an entrepreneur or for life, is learning how to overcome obstacles. So maybe you swing on a rope ladder kind of a thing, and then you have to fling your body through the air and catch a cargo net or a ledge with your fingertips, they call it cliffhanger ledges. Or sometimes you have to balance across a slack line or run across obstacles that move, like spinning blocks or a spinning, pipe or something like that. So it's basically go through obstacles. On the show, when you fall, and everybody falls eventually, you fall in water on the show. But in the ninja gyms, and there's hundreds of them across North America, it's usually crash pads or mats or something like that. But it's really fun because they change up the obstacles every couple of weeks. So you have to be cerebral.
Yeah.
Kind of like rock climbing. You have to think through what's the path I'm going to take to get through the route if you're bouldering or whatever. It's a full body workout, and it's basically like a jungle gym for adults. And it's a really fun sport.
Is it similar to parkour?
It is. There's both upper body and lower body activities in obstacle course racing. And so there's some of them, like the lower body would be like parkour type obstacles. Yes, for sure. And then there's elements of parkour where you use your hands as well. You're climbing up a wall or whatever. But and then there's upper body parts of obstacles where your feet don't touch the ground at all, not even once from the time you start the obstacle until you end. So,
oh my goodness. Yeah, I can see where being a former gymnast really helped out with that. It's a whole different strength. So then you went on to place number 8 in the world in the over 40.
That was actually, let's see, I got first place my last 2 over 40 competitions, but I believe last year, that's right. And this year I haven't gone to Worlds yet, but I think I'm in the top 10, maybe even the top 5 so far in the over 40 category this year. I switched from the elite or pro division 2 years ago to the over 40 category because EarthGrid was really taking off and I didn't have time to train as much. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to compete with these 18 and 20-year-olds anymore. I'm going to take it easy and compete with 40-year-olds, even though I'm 56.
Oh, there you go. So it sounds like you're still doing it, still hard at it.
Yep. Yeah.
That is fascinating. See, now there's a whole nother book you could write. If you only had time.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, I mean, everyone, has their own sport that they're drawn to. For me, it was this one, but it does help because when you're developing a solar farm or a wind farm or a tunnel project or any kind of technology, really, there's obstacles, right? And so
Yeah.
the sport teaches you to fail over and over and over again. You fall on the obstacle over and over and over again until you finally figure it out. And so that grit that you learn to get back up and try again and again and again builds up that muscle, that obstacle overcoming kind of muscle, and that
Yeah.
tenacity. So that's one of the things I love about it, and I actually believe it has helped me tremendously with my success over the last few years in my career, because I've been able to not worry about failing, knowing if I keep at it, I'll get through it.
Yeah, because now that's just ingrained in you that if I'm persistent, it has to happen. It can't not.
Exactly. Eventually, you'll find a way to get, over, above, around, or through the obstacle, to get it done. But also it helps keep me in shape, so I sleep better at night. So I have more
Yeah.
energy during the day. I'm able to get up early. I hardly ever set an alarm. I pop out of bed and work out pretty much every morning and do the sauna and usually a cold, hot and cold type thing. And
Oh
so
yeah.
I feel like that helps me in my balance in life. Not only at work but also to be a good husband and a good father because I have more energy.
Absolutely. Everybody's looking for that, and most don't have the persistence to do it. So you're running Earth Grid, and you are doing the ninja obstacle courses. You're a dad. You're on several boards.
Yes.
What else do you have going on? Because I bet there's something else.
No, I mean, not really. I mean, I also a husband. My wife and I celebrated our 20th anniversary a couple of weeks ago in Kauai.
Awesome.
Yeah, so balance is important. I meditate, at least twice a day. But and then yeah, one of the boards I sit on and I'm chairman of this one, is Pristine Sun, the solar company that I founded almost 20 years ago or 15 years ago or whenever. Yeah, it's run by other people. It's got a great team, but I would say I spend of my professional time probably 95% of my time on Earth Grid, maybe 3% of my time on Pristine Sun, and the other 2% doing other boards or mentoring here and there.
Oh, okay. Excellent. So then, as we wrap this up, what is some, what are some parting words of advice that you would give to someone?
Yeah, that one, the first thing that comes to mind is find your power of purpose. For me, I've gotten so much gratitude out of my career and what I do for work because I feel like I have a power purpose. I feel like I'm making the world a better place for my son and eventually his kids and the rest of the world. But I'm passionate about renewable energy, clean energy, and EarthGrid isn't directly renewable energy, but it's related to it. It's enabling. We think will enable over
Yeah.
100 gigawatts of new solar and wind, which is huge. So I find that people who don't do something that they love are usually not as happy. They might drink more, they might do other things more that they probably shouldn't because they are not chasing something that gives them a sense of fulfillment. So whatever that is, find it, search, do some tough soul searching and ask questions. Am I really doing something that gets me up in the morning, that gives me a sense of purpose? So that would be my biggest advice, especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur, because it's so hard to do it and to push through all the difficult times that are coming. So if it's not something you're truly passionate about, it's going to be really hard to keep at it.
Excellent. And to be okay with failing and to just keep at it. I love the lesson from that as well. So, Troy, thank you so much for coming on today. This was an awesome interview.
It's my pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for listening to Pivot Perspectives with your host, Chris O'Byrne. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advice on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we will see you on the next episode.